Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Healing Wisdom has some new sustaining members. This hour programming is brought to you by Kristen Knowles and Tom Fettig. You can become a sustaining member of WOMR for as little as $15 a month. For more information, give us a call at 508-487-2619. Hello out there. It's very exciting to be here today with Melissa Ferretti.
Yeah, wani matapid. Well, wani kisak. It's afternoon. Natasuis, Melissa Ferretti, New Tomas, Tikwana Makwapakwit, Patuxet, Natai, Bourne. And what I've said to you in my traditional language is good afternoon or good day. My name is, or I am called, Melissa Ferretti. I am from, or my genealogy is Herring Pond. I am from Plymouth and I live in Bourne. So it's really happy to be here and honored. Thanks for having me.
We're honored to have you here. You are the chairlady president of the Herring Pond Wampanoag Tribal Council, vice chair of the Bourne Select Board, and real estate agent. Tell us a bit about your childhood.
Going way back. But yeah, I was, really honored, and I feel very grateful actually to have been raised by my father's Aunt Verna. So my mom was very young when she had my sister Brenda. She was about 16. And things happen, and it ended up my dad ended up with custody of my sister and I, Brenda, who was 2 years older than I. And we really enjoyed and spent a lot of time with Verna. And we ended up calling her Mama over the years because of the fact that my dad was a single parent, and he, we had to work. We spent a lot of time over there with Verna up in Cedarville. So Verna was raised herself in Plymouth, where I was raised, and down in the valley, which we call Bourndale, and along with a lot of the other tribal citizens, of course. My dad was born in the valley. His dad was born in the valley. Verna was born in the valley. And it was really a pleasure being raised by Verna. And, my dad worked, but it ended up just those short visits that we'd spend with her when he worked, it turned into we didn't want to leave. So living with Verna, 20 years, I was raised with Verna up in Cedarville in that little house with my sister Brenda and I. We grew up very young, learning what Verna used to call living off the fat of the land. And we really did. When I look to, growing up now, I remember, those times. And our house was really small, but our garden was giant. So the garden was bigger than our house. We had a herring shed in the background, what resembled sort of an old outhouse, I guess it looked like. But it was set up to smoke the herring. Once, of course, every herring season, it was a big deal. And we had another little shed that was a chicken coop. So you can picture the yard. I mean, little tiny house, big garden, herring shed, chicken coop. And we spent a lot of time out in the woods. Verna sending us out, walking in the woods with her. She did not drive. Born in 1905. The one thing she never did was get a driver's license. So we did a lot of walking in those days. Walked down to Great Herring Pond. We would walk, 3 miles to Manomet, to Ellisville to get fresh water from the spring. I mean, I could go on the adventures that we spent in the woods. So yeah, that's how I grew up. Deer meat, rabbit. She could fool us quite a lot when we were young, and then you get a little bit older and you find some rabbit hair in the stew, and it's over. So can't fool you anymore. But for a lot of years, that's how we went on. So yeah.
Wow. And you foraged for herbs. Can you talk about that connection to plants?
Yeah, well, Verna was always doing something with plants, and a lot of it was from the walks that we would take in the woods. So I was quite young, so it's really hard now to remember a lot of the names and the reasons for things. But she always had a remedy or a tincture or something she was making, or if you cut yourself, she'd rub something on it. But the ones I remember most was during herring season. I think it was, we used to, it was such a big deal for us because it was one of the only times when we were young that she would send us out in the woods alone, right? And she would say, all right, you know where this is. I showed you this last season. I need this, that, and that. And one of the things for some reason that really stuck out was the sweet fern. That was one of the main ingredients that she would want to use in the bucket underneath the herring to get this flavor, that she really wanted in her food. And I think it would be different, I would imagine, I would think she used different herbs and different spices depending on what she was flavoring with. So yeah, I remember that quite a lot. It was one of my most vivid memories as a child running for sweet fern and pine, of course.
Hmm. Very cool. So, can you talk about living between worlds? Because you and I had a conversation probably a couple months ago back, and you were saying, that you felt like you had both kind of lives happening simultaneously. The life where you're connected to your culture, and then this westernized society.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have this craving, I think, as indigenous people to relearn and to regain that culture that a lot of us had lost over the years. Like I said, I was really fortunate to be able to grow up raised eating traditionally and, fishing and, quahogging and, hunting and all of those things, but not everybody has that option. So I think when I say that I kind of walk in two worlds, it's really because now, I went from a place where I was in corporate America. I worked for a for-profit, organization. Spent a lot of time in real estate, of course. I've been licensed for 30 years. I've been in the real estate industry, whether administrative or listing and selling. And I went from that sort of world to starting to attend my tribal meetings and finding a community at risk and saying, okay, you need to like take everything you knew and go do this work so that you can protect and save your community and avoid our erasure. So I went from, this different world into tribal government, learning, of course, 500 years of history and trying to educate myself on a lot of this history that we may not have been taught in the school system. Learning the real history that kind of goes with learning about yourself and your culture. So, and then I have sort of that municipal hat that I have now. So that's much different, but they're so common in so many ways, the way we act as a tribal government and the way that I have to respond as a a select board member. And in many ways, they're the same because I owe the same obligation to my tribal citizens as I do my tribal citizens in Bourne, as I do the Bourne residents. So walking in two worlds, it's really because I love my country. And I think a lot of people, they think Native people for some reason, hate America. And that's not really the case. I think many Native people feel harmed by the structure and the way the government was formed. And a lot of the atrocities that happen with it, loss of land, so much we could go into, right? But at the same time, we love our country. So for me, I love being an American, but I'm also very, very much deeply rooted in my heritage and my connection to my Wampanoag history, more so than anything, right? In many cases, because I'm here in Plymouth and Bourne because of that connection and that matrilineal descent.
Your tribal council meets in the 1838 meeting house.
That is what we would call our headquarters currently, because we don't have a tribal building, we don't have a government building as of yet, because we're obviously not federally recognized. That's something we're working on, and that's a whole, we can get into that a little later. But yeah, so we still, against all odds, of the 3,000 plus acres of land that was set aside for the Herring Pond Indians, we have now our 6 acre Dinah Path and about 0.43 of 200 acres our meeting house used to sit on. So pretty crazy when you think of it that way. We retain about 1% of our original homelands today. The
Wow.
rest was.
Wow. Had there been a reservation at some point?
Well, yeah, it was called the Herring Pond Plantation, and they also called Mashpee Plantation. It was just the word that was used back then. We don't so much love that term. It should have been called the Herring Pond Reservation, but the Herring Pond Plantation, it was it was land that, of course, at one time it was all of our land. But when the sort of allotment of lands happened, and way prior before that, they sort of took the colonial government set aside a plantation or a reservation for the Herring Pond Indian sole use. That was, and it had a full description, 2,600 acres here, 200-acre lot in Cedarville on Great Herring Pond, and then a 400-acre lot on the other side that was partially in Plymouth and mostly in Bourne. So, what was once all ours, we were the lands. They basically was said it was the the um the lands were identified. Each individual tribal family was given a home lot and a wood lot, and the rest was it was considered as surplus to the Indian needs and sold off to the white settlers or for the business interests of the colony itself. So yes, we were allowed and set aside those reservation lands at one time.
Can you talk about the goals of the tribal council?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, obviously our traditional tribal government structure was much different than you see today. And there are many tribes throughout the United States today that are called what they call IRA tribes. And that was the Indian Reorganization Act and from the 30s. And those tribes actually don't even have traditional leaders, chiefs, and as such, like we do today. They operate more typically like the traditional federal government, and they took on those roles as an agreement during that time to get recognition and to it was to sort of to empower tribes to take on governmental structures so that they could grow and have this structure. Herring Pond was missed during that period, along with Mashpee. But so our councils today, they act very much as like a municipality in many ways. So we have a 7-person board. We have our officers, which would be, the chair, the vice chair, the secretary and treasurer, and then we have our 4 tribal counselors at large. We have a medicine man traditionally and a chief that's our chief is retired, and we have not raised a new chief yet, but we would have those traditional roles as well. So the council is the, administrative executive body of the tribe. We do also have we've organized 2 nonprofits over the years, of course, to, raise funds because we're not federally recognized. We have to be able to, um, you know, get donations and such. So over the time, we did establish 2 nonprofits, one being the Pondville Baptist Church, which is our meeting house. The Baptist Church is really the Herring Pond Wampanoag Indian tribe, and as is the tribe itself. But we do have a nonprofit of the same name in which we use to do business under. So the tribal council, we meet monthly. It's very much like a municipality. Our tribal council is there to write policy, to ordinances, to agree on funds that are expended, bylaw changes, all of those things that your traditional municipality would do. Of course, we're a little bit more limited because we are not federally recognized yet. We're working on that. So we still act a sovereign regardless.
So, what was at stake at the 80th National Congress of American Indians? Can you tell us about the vote that took place this past winter?
Yeah, sure. So the winter conference had come up, and Indian country has been over the last few years, there's been a lot of notice to, sort of pretendians and fake Indians, so to speak. So unfortunately, what happens is states like Massachusetts, who have no legislative process to recognize their tribes, would technically consider any tribe in Massachusetts that's not federally recognized as not recognized at all. But that's really not the case in many situations. Herring Pond being one, we're a distinct tribal community. We're still in our 1838 meeting house. But unfortunately, it's spread across Indian country, and there are tribes that have sort of come up that people know not don't know who they are. There are scholars that have gone through time and they found that these people are not Native American and they're pretending to be Indian and they're not. Herring Pond is not one of those groups. But what happens is there's a lot of discussion in Indian country by the federal tribes that feel that the state tribes should not be on the same level as they are, even though many of those were state recognized at one time. And the laws, crazy enough, there's a lot of tribes that are federally recognized now that could not meet the definitions that we have in place today to get recognized, right? So it got a little hostile. Things happen, and somehow a couple of the larger tribes had put through a proposal for the National Congress of American Indians to amend their bylaws and remove state tribes from membership of the National Congress of American Indians and give us some lame sort of associate membership like they would a nonprofit or another tribal serving organization, basically trying to remove our sovereignty, say we're not tribes and that we don't belong in the same arena as the federal tribes. So, it was really scary thinking that this might pass, but it had to pass by a two-thirds majority vote, and it failed miserably. Thankfully, a lot of the federal tribes saw and they remembered being state recognized and how that felt when you're trying to, who you are, what your documents say, and you know who you are, and to be marginalized in a space where you should be welcome and loved, it's really harmful and sad. But it was really amazing to see the tribes that came out to support the state tribes. So we won that vote, and it ended up there was no change to the membership, and so far so good. It's probably not the last we're going to hear of some of that, but for now we're still full membership voting members of NCA. So that's a good question. Thanks.
What did you learn about history as a tribal member growing up that wasn't taught in schools and hasn't, as a mother and a grandmother who grew up in Plymouth? I'm wondering what your thoughts on how the history of this land and your people are being presented in the education system as a whole.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that, we've got a lot of initiatives. There's some legislation that's happening, but I'm personally working with a group, and it's, the federal tribes and other stakeholders and of, tribes and groups across the Commonwealth. And, we're working on getting proper curriculum in the school systems that teaches the real story. And it gives tribes like Herring Pond an opportunity to be heard in that narrative, as oftentimes we could be removed very easily. And thankfully our sister tribes, we've always had a close relationship with Mashpee and Aquinnah. And many of our people, when we go back and look at our genealogy, we're very closely tied as tribes. And so it's really great that Herring Pond does have the support of our sister tribes to move ahead with our recognition processes. But it's a hard place to be sometimes. So learned a lot about my history, and a lot of it came from Verna. From those are the things that they don't teach you in school: how to live and how to survive in an oppressed society where you're really not supposed to be heard. Verna came from a time where it wasn't always okay to say you were Native American, and that included in the school system. So we didn't talk about it a lot when we were children, yet we all met as a community and we did things as a tribe, but it wasn't well spoke of. And I can even remember, Verna talking about, like if the census people would come on the property, she'd throw them out and didn't want to talk with them. So it was very hard to not learn about it in school, but be at home and learn it. So the school didn't teach me, but I had that, I had Verna teaching me, I remember her stories and the things she taught us. So school system didn't really do it, but we did learn it at home and, through our sister tribes as well.
Earlier you and I were talking about the history of Native people here being taken into indentured servitude, and there being plenty of evidence of that. Can you talk about your research and what you've learned?
Yeah, well, it was shocking actually and I know we talked about a lot of my work over the years has, really been educating myself on the history of the Herring Pond Wampanoag people. And in that research, we've come across a lot of records and documents that clearly state, and I was just looking at one a few moments ago from the Native Northeast portal where Robin Seepit, they were indentured, they were charged with a crime and indentured into the house of the the court justices for 2 years for stealing, I think it was a canoe or one other thing. I can't, it won't let me minus it here, but I had it in front of me. Let me see if I can just read it really quickly. So this one spoke of it was Jonas Seepit and Robin Seepit, which are Herring Pond people that date back to John Cotton's congregation. And those people are in our tribe today, the descendants of the Seepit family. They're one of our families. Two of them actually. Well, they all connect, to be honest. But it talks about he's ordered to serve for Joseph Hawksley, their heirs in a firm in a assigns the full time of 2 years. And the other gentleman, John Seepit, he is ordered to serve Bartlett and his heirs for full time for 2 years for Edmund Freeman and Ebenezer Hinge jointly. So Ralph Jonas was ordered to serve for Edmund Freeman and Ebenezer Hinge for theirs for full time for 2 years. So this was in January of 1696, and those three were charged and assigned to indentured servitude. And it's been there's more. That's just one of several documents that I have found where we were enslaved in households. Our Herring Pond people were enslaved in people's households. Um, for minor things as well, which is really sad.
And I've been doing a little bit of research, and it seems to be a pretty pervasive thing. This indenture servitude definitely parallels enslavement. And I think that the term servitude doesn't really sort of do that captivity justice, especially in the context of cultural erasure, by you know by means of aggression and that sort of thing. And there also looks like there's early documents that show abductions of indigenous people here to Europe predating the Mayflower landing as well.
Some of the things we saw too is what's important to note is a lot of times the sort of, the indentured, you were indentured because you didn't have the money to pay the fine. That was another thing that we saw. They impose fines and taxation on you. And sometimes that happened over a lot of the times where we lost land. We owed $100 and they took hundreds of acres of land to pay the debt. So, but if you didn't have the money to pay it, you could go into slavery and go live at the house of the justice and pay it off that way, which is just crazy. We don't consider ourselves oppressed, right? Like we know that the oppression happens, but we have lawyers and doctors and nurses and, people like myself with professional backgrounds. And we have smart individuals that are in our tribe, but our native people are oppressed, like the whole thing. So it's a lot to unravel and try to really find solutions without getting, bitter, I guess, right? So I just try to carry on and do what's right and do my best.
So I would love for you to talk about the Community Art Collaborative partnering with the Plymouth Public Schools with the library project.
Yeah, sure. I'll give us that project was ongoing for quite some time. It started pre-COVID, and then of course the pandemic hit, and we really still made it work even during that time. But the whole time during that collaborative effort, it was the Community Art Collaborative, the Plymouth Public Library, and we started out with Community Art Collaborative and what they had in Pilgrim Hall with Donna Curtin. So we started out with this honeycomb project, and this is how it just sort of took its life of its own. And all of this, the art was shaped like a honeycomb. So the youth or littles didn't have to be just children; it was anyone who wanted to draw, and everybody got a honeycomb, and you could draw art inside the honeycomb. And what they did was that they transformed it into this big display, this giant art display out on the lawn of the public library. It was mobile. They could move it to the library, they could move it to the lawn at town hall. And there were these giant, each honeycomb was huge with the art in it. And it was just really amazing how they set this up. So we had this thought, we really want to do a coloring book that sort of uses the art from the community art collaborative work that we did. And we talked about a coloring book, but then they had this tiny library idea. And we thought community art collaborative and the generous people at the public library and the people who built it for us, everybody got together and we came up with a design, we drew it out. This woman took all of this time to design it, build it. And it was just amazing when it was done. I mean, the little bins, they're weatherproof. I mean, they couldn't have put any other thought into it. So the artwork from the honeycomb project is on the face of the tiny library. It is the art, and the boxes themselves are shaped like honeycombs. So it's a seed exchange in the top. We need to add some seeds in there, by the way. So if you go, it's looking sad right now. We've got to stock it up. So we're going to do that this week. So the top row has a seed exchange, so you can put seeds in or you can take seeds out. And then there's books, of course, tiny library. We have books in there to share. People can put books in, take books out. It's a Wi-Fi hotspot for people who are struggling, who can't afford internet. I mean, I know we pay a lot of money for just internet. I can't imagine a struggling family who doesn't have Wi-Fi and they have a teenage child who has to do homework or whatever. We thought, go park in the parking lot and you can log into the Wi-Fi and do your home, whatever they need. So it's accessible to anyone who goes there. The password's out front on the little library, and it's been really great. And then there's one more bin down the bottom for like non-perishables, and we put like period products and all kinds of stuff in there. So that's our tiny library, and the coloring book came to fruition from all of that work. We created our first, herring pond, coloring book. It's geared toward very young children.
Thank you so much, Melissa Harding Ferretti, Chair Lady President of the Herring Pond Wampanoag Tribal Council and Vice Chair of the Bourne Select Board. You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org.